I gotta get the speakers hooked up. So I'll try. I'll try my best. They kind of didn't tell me that. I'm going to try my best. When you're at the podium, this won't be on, but once you sit down, then I'll turn it on. So maybe you just want to clip it to your belt somewhere, and then try to feed it up through your shirt, just because we're going to be on TV, so we don't want to see any ugly cables. We have a breast pocket. Yep, no cell phones either. If we can tell all our speakers to leave their cell phones somewhere, they interfere with the microphones.
Check.
If I put it on airplane.
Sometimes it can still make little staticky noises, so.
So that I need to
Sure. And then just, I like slip it up through my shirt, and I know it's in front of like everything.
So let's go ahead and
Absolutely. I'm just going to grab your shirt. Once or twice.
we're going to go ahead and get started in just a minute.
There we go. Awesome. Just so you know, every time you turn your head, it's not going to be able to see you as well. So turn your body, not your head. Yep, so turn your body, not your head. I know that's tough to do, but
okay.
Yep. All right, where's my next person?
Check.
Are you my next person? You're right there? Okay, that's fine. Find somewhere to it does, because I have all your names on like the little banners, like CNN banners you see, and they're all the camera shots are all set up. Yep. And then if you kind of slip it up through your jacket there, we just don't want layers. Grab this, and I'm going to touch your jacket. Women's clothes are always the toughest. Look straight at me. Okay. Just so you know, when you're on TV, every time you turn your head but not your body, the mic doesn't see your mouth anymore. So try to remember to turn your body, not just your head. All right. So just go ahead and put that on your belt. Also, no cell phones.
No, I put mine in the bag.
Take it out. Yep. They can mess with the antennas. I usually go around the button, my button up behind my tie, and loop it through another button. That'll keep the wire from
How is that? You mean in here? Inside?
Oh, no, you can only
Okay.
I'll hide all that. All right. Just go around the buttons right there.
Okay. How about I do it this way? That way, I know it's...
right. And once again,
You don't have to be robotic about it, but just be kind of cognizant every time you
All
turn
right.
your head, the mic kind of drops out.
okay, thank you.
All right, where's my last speaker? Are you my last speaker? Sorry, ladies. Okay.
glad to be
You want to
here.
clip this to... You're actually right there.
All right.
So if you just want to clip it to your skirt or...
Yeah. Eclipse. Oh, there's Eclipse.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
Here, if you want to clip it, I don't mind.
Are you okay with that? All right. That's a tough one.
Yeah. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you.
And then just...
This, I represented this part. Yep.
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 All right. And now I'm gonna grab your lapel.
Awesome.
Look straight at me, please. All right. Just so you know, every time you turn your head, the mic kind of can't see you, so try to turn your body.
Okay.
Yep, try to turn your body with
Turn
your
the
head.
body, kind of
Yep.
like in dance. Got it. All right.
Awesome.
Thanks.
All right.
Awesome.
We're all ready. Everyone, we're gonna go live.
So this is web stream too. Oh lordy. Help. Ah, hi Steve.
Just waiting for the mic.
I didn't much.
Are we good?
I didn't actually
All
prepare.
right, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started.
Good.
Do you want to have a seat?
Good. Okay. Awesome.
We'll get this show on the road. How's this? Okay, so I just need to kiss the mic. Come on in, folks, have a seat. Good morning and welcome. For those of you who contemplated whether you should stay at home and shovel this little bit of snow we had this morning, just remember, it could be 37.7 inches or whatever it was that they had in parts of Pennsylvania, which is amazing. I'm Laura Bloomberg. I'm the Associate Dean at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and I'd like to welcome you here this morning. And on behalf of both the Humphrey School and the Opportunity for All Kids Foundation, we're really delighted to be co-hosting this conversation this morning. Mitch Pearlstein is the president of that state-based advocacy organization, and he had, unfortunately, sadly, a death in the family and was not able to be here. He's still in Florida, so he will not be joining us this morning. But we do, as you will hear in a moment, have a really distinguished group of panelists this morning. I'm a former lot of things. I'm a former elected school board member and a former K-12 teacher and a former K-12 principal and a former district administrator, and always the parent of two children who went through our public school system. So I admit I probably have a strong bias, but I also think I speak the truth when I say I believe that we're going to be talking today about the policy issue that is the most important policy issue of our day, and that is the education of our children. Oftentimes in universities, this is a conversation that is had squarely in colleges of education, and more as a school of public affairs, we realize that the education of children is so central to the public policy decisions that we make every day that it needs to be squarely a part of our curriculum and our dialogue as well, which makes me doubly glad to be here today to welcome you and to be a part of this conversation. And I really do hope that this will be a conversation. I know I was talking to the panelists before we got started, and I think they're eager to hear your conversations or hear your questions and engage in a discussion with you. But first, let me turn it over to Lee McGrath. I'm pleased to introduce him as the Managing Director of the Institute for Justice, and he will introduce our panelists this morning. Please welcome Lee.
Well, good morning. I am Lee McGrath, and I am not George Parker. I am his failed travel agent. George desperately wanted to be with us today. He 2 airlines and 3 different planes He gave up this morning when Delta Airlines announced there was mechanical difficulties that would cause him to be here no earlier than 1 p.m. So I gave him a license to stay home and to come back on the same type of car that took him to the airport at 4 this morning. I applaud you. We have separated those who are mildly interested in education to those who are dedicated to the principal political question, which is how do we educate our children. So I thank you for coming. Let me point out a couple of current legislators. You can bump into former legislators who are spread among you, but we're thrilled to have Senator David Hann from Eden Prairie here, who is the minority leader. Representative Sandra Erickson, who chairs the Education Policy Committee, and Representative Jim Knobloch from St. Cloud. Jim is leading an important effort as we speak. He's co-chair with Senator Bobby Joe Champion of the Economic Disparities Working Group, and to that group, he has brought a proposal that you'll hear more about today, which is building upon the tax credit and tax deduction that Arne Carlson got enacted nearly 20 years ago. My job this morning is to introduce those panelists who have made it from, one who's made it from DC, 3 others who are local. First, our moderator is Beth Hawkins, who you know as a reporter on education policy. For 8 years, she wrote for MinPost, and now is working at a group called Education Post, a not-for-profit organization. She has written for many people across many magazines, More, Mother Jones, and Minnesota Monthly. Beth, I'll turn it over to you in just a moment. Representative Jennifer Loon is here as well. She is the chair of the Education Finance Committee in the House, a leader on educational innovation. She represents Eden Prairie, as does Senator Hann, and she has been taking on the good fight on numerous issues, including things like teacher tenure, teacher licensing, and LIFO, and has been a long supporter, having previously authored a bill dealing with tax credits for scholarship granting organizations, and you'll hear more about that as well. Former Senator Ember Reichgott-Young is to my right, to the right of Jennifer, and she is the mother of charter schools. She conceived and gave birth to charter schools in the early 90s, and to this day, thanks to her work, Minnesota has the best charter school law in the nation. And this option has spurred enormous change and brought schools like KIPP and Harvest Prep and Hiawatha dealing with the challenges of urban education, offering those solutions. One of the fun things you've written a book, and one of the components of her book is her work, describing her work with Albert Shanker. So perhaps you can talk about where Albert Shanker came down on the issues of parental choice. And finally, my dear colleague at the Institute for Justice, Dick Comer, is here. Dick was committed. He committed for at least 48 hours of travel to get here. He arrived yesterday. I'm thrilled to have him. Dick is a human encyclopedia of establishment cases and Blaine Amendment cases and the type of litigation that inevitably happens when people like Representative Loon, Representative Knobloch, Senator Hann, Representative Erickson succeed, and former Governor Carlson succeed in getting school choice legislation enacted. So with those brief introductions, let me turn it over to, first to welcome you again, thank you for coming, and turn it over to Beth.
Thank you. It's wonderful to see so many of you here today, and it's very exciting to be here with such esteemed panelists, and I think that there's no more fitting place to start than with the mother of the charter school legislation. I happen to know that Ember has spent a great deal of time in the last few years traveling the country, talking to people about school choice and chartering, and hearing their questions and clearing up their misconceptions. And I think really a great starting place would be to ask you to reflect a little bit on the health of school choice and on what you see in it now, almost 3 decades on.
First of all, let me just say that it took a lot more than 9 months to birth charter schools. But this year, chartering is 25 years old. The 25th anniversary of the law being passed in Minnesota in June 1991 is this year, and I'm hoping that we can celebrate that throughout the country. Minnesota has been the leader. Today, chartering is in 43 states, Guam, Alberta, Canada, other countries. Believe it or not, chartering is in 10 schools in the Kurdish region of Iraq. Yeah. DC is nearly 50%, Detroit is over 50%, New Orleans is 90% chartering. We have about nearly 3 million students in 6,700 charter public schools across the country. 1 million names are on waiting lists, and in some states, the waiting lists are larger than the actual spaces in the schools that exist. 2/3 of America supports chartering. You wouldn't know that in some states, where unfortunately it's become very partisan. And as a Democrat, I've been spending my time going around the country trying to dispel the myths of chartering, Beth, and that's what I've been doing and why I've been doing it. Because I believe the future of chartering is only if we can continue to inform the facts about it. 2/3 of America supports chartering. Every presidential candidate since Bill Clinton has supported chartering, and yet it is very controversial in some states. As far as how it's working, the idea of chartering is going well in the sense that it continues to spur choices, it continues to spur opportunity and innovation. It is about freedom to choose. It's about an effective education for every child. It is delivering that. We have shown that in schools around the country that every child can succeed, that you can if you have the expectations and the opportunity in place. Every child can succeed. It is an efficient and accountable use of tax dollars. Actually, charters work on 70% of the funding of district schools on average, only 70%. So they do more with less. And chartering is about opportunities for children. All of that is succeeding. However, not all charter schools are succeeding. So chartering is succeeding, but not all charter schools are succeeding. Now that's okay to this extent. If we go with accountability, we can close the charter schools. That's the whole point of the charter school bargain. We give you more independence, teachers and parents, to create a charter school. In return for that, you are accountable to goals in that performance contract. And if you don't meet those goals, your school can be closed. That does not happen in district schools. So it's a trade of regulation for results, bureaucracy for accountability. Now, that piece is working, but we're not closing all the schools we should, and we're not seeing as much innovation as we should, and we can talk about that more.
Excellent. Dick, I'm curious. I had the chance a couple of weeks ago to attend some charter schools in Seattle and Tacoma, and Washington's chartering movement, which is 9 schools strong, is of course in terrible trouble at the moment, and the legislature is taking up its fate. And I'm curious, given the Supreme Court action there, whether you have opinions about whether we're going to see a wave of legal challenges to choice. I've picked up on some sorts of regulatory attacks in different legislatures in different states, attempts to kind of re-bureaucratize charters to kind of bring them further under the regulatory fold. But I am curious, in the wake of Washington, whether you see a kind of a frontal attack on choice.
Actually, Washington's the second
Okay.
such frontal attack on charter schools.
based on state constitutional provisions. The first one came in Georgia, where a part of their chartering system was struck down by the Georgia Supreme Court because it allowed entities other than school districts to charter schools. And as you probably understand, school districts are not good charter authorizers. They don't particularly want to share. It's the nature of monopoly. So I'm happy to report that in Georgia, after the Supreme Court struck down the non-district charter law, the Georgia electorate overcame that and modified the Constitution. So the Georgia chartering law is back in business. It's a much bigger program there, of course, than in Washington State. Obviously, the Georgia and Washington situations are very different. I don't know if we would have a similar response in Washington State. I'm hoping that that would happen because, quite frankly, given their horrible Blaine Amendment jurisprudence in Washington, the only thing they can have is charter schools as an alternative. I actually think that it is inevitable that the same forces who prefer the status quo and who attack any sort of private school choice program are also offended by charter school legislation. And that, who was it who said, I think it's Thomas Jefferson, that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. We're going to have to continue to try and respond and reject the efforts to re-regulate charter schools, because if they are, turned into just sort of pale imitations of district assigned schools, their value will be lost. But from my perspective, charter schools are the most successful, the more independent they are, and the more they can function like private schools. And that private school choice works for the same reason that charter schools work, which is they empower parents. They empower parents to make decisions, and they enable an educational marketplace to respond and adjust to what parents want. And that's how you keep these participating schools accountable, because if parents don't want to use your charter school because it's not working, they can go somewhere else. And the more choices you have, the more likely you are to find a good fit between your child's needs and the schools. Now, I have always respected Minnesota because you have been in the forefront of charter school legislation. But you have fallen behind, in my view, by not taking it to the next step and expanding your educational marketplace to include greater parental empowerment, because I think that will energize all of the schools. That's a very long answer to a very short question. I apologize.
Can I just address the Washington State thing just real quickly? And I want to acknowledge my colleague in the audience, Steve Kelly. Would you raise your hand? Where did you go, Steve? You just left. Oh, darn. I'm too late. He wrote a wonderful op-ed on that. And the Washington State situation really is very narrow, pertaining to the Washington State Constitution. It will not, in my view, have an impact on other constitutions around the country. And he wrote that in his article, I thought, very, very well.
Excellent. I'm not sure I'm live here.
Yes.
I am? Okay.
We can't hear you.
Can't hear me at all? How's this? Okay, it's probably not very good for people out there in webcast land. So Representative Loon, the commonality to both of these statements had to do with the exchange for accountability. And Minnesota, several years ago, got the nation's toughest charter accountability law, but it was a long slog, and it was hard fought. It was surprisingly hard fought, and it had some surprising foes. Would you like to address the difficulty of creating that kind of legislation and seeing it through?
Well, I think there is a variety of concerns that erupt when you have that kind of measure. And I think for all of the reasons that Ember mentioned and Dick echoed was that when you create this alternative system of public schools, which is what charters are, and provide them a different level of accountability than we apply to traditional public schools, there is always the concern that maybe that's a good idea that we should carry over into the other system. Should we have a tough measure of accountability where we would actually close or do something differently with those public schools? And I think that is, there's a great deal of concern on the part of some folks that could possibly be held up as a standard that we should employ there. We do have measures currently in statute in Minnesota, fairly new, along the World's Best Workforce legislation that was passed and into law. We've just had the first report. In fact, I just received it yesterday from the Department of Education, working my way through that. But the commissioner is empowered to actually withhold funds from schools not meeting their goals, and the goal is that we reduce the achievement gap by 50% by fiscal year 17, a very daunting task, and that we move towards 95% achievement for all students according to those plans. I think the question remains to be seen is whether or not we would have the courage to follow through on those consequences of not meeting those goals, of falling short of the educational attainment that we want for all of our students.
Is there a fear that charter school closure, like the trigger that has been discussed here of a certain number of years of a certain performance would trigger an automatic closure? Is there a fear that that would set a precedent that could spread into the mainline district schools?
I think that would be a not terribly likely outcome, although there could be that fear there, to be honest. But there's fears on the other side. Even those who are strong charter supporters and want to support accountability as well. A comment was made to me by a colleague who said, well, for the kid who just doesn't fit in and hasn't fit in anywhere, and they found a charter school, if that charter school is not, achieving even at top marks or where we want them, but this is the only place where this child has felt comfortable and has some kind of an environment that is felt safe and nurturing, maybe that in and of itself is okay, is we provided something of value to that child. So that was an interesting perspective that no one had shared with me on that topic to that point that made me think about, well, maybe there's some of that concern from the side of going, really tough on charters that doesn't extend only to the concern about extending that accountability to traditional public schools.
So maybe we can switch gears a little bit here and talk about current events that are likely to generate education headlines in the coming weeks and months, especially as the legislative session here gets underway and as legislatures elsewhere begin to do their work. Integration is possibly the hottest topic of the last 6 months. There's a rulemaking process here in Minnesota that has gone before an administrative law judge that's tremendously controversial. There are 2 or 3 schools of thought on whether the state's charters should be included in the state's integration rule and some of the consequences that might occur if they were. And I'm just wondering how we balance our growing understanding that there are many, many charter schools that are culturally affirming, that are doing wonderful things with students of a single race or ethnicity because they are creating programming that attracts those students, And yet we still have this dream of the beloved community. How do we balance those? What do you see as the next frontier?
Back in 1991, there weren't a lot of fans of charter schools. It was kind of lonely. One of the groups that did come forward to support the idea of more opportunities for children was the Urban League and communities of color generally. They were some of the most strong supporters at a time when nobody knew what charter schools were. Today, there's a number of schools that we know that are succeeding greatly. One I'll just give as an example in South Minneapolis called Friendship Academy of the Arts. It's the top beat the odds school, 95% free and reduced lunch. They've got the highest test scores of all the beat the odds schools. One tiny school. So yes, they're primarily African American, but they're working. If you were to really ask the public, should we close a school like that? Or should we diversify it or whatever, you know, I guess they would just say, if it's working, it's working. Now, can schools do more outreach? Absolutely, and I think that's a function of our Department of Education, and we should be investing more and maybe figuring out ways that we can do more outreach to reach more students, diverse students. But the bottom line for me is this. If that deseg rule includes charters, and I have signed, I am not neutral on this, I've signed a petition on this for the administrative law judge. If we actually include charters in that rule, you are undermining the entire fundamentals of choice with chartering. Because what you've got are parents choosing the option that they want. There's not any mandated choices here. It's not the civil rights era. They are choosing what's working for those children. And I think it totally goes against the fundamentals of chartering as it started and continues.
Dick, if a school is largely single race or single ethnicity based on parental choice, is it fair to call that segregation legally?
Oh, it's not segregation legally.
Can you walk us through the distinction?
Okay. There is, I mean, the Supreme Court has finally, after decades, clarified that what violates the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause is the deliberate segregation of the races. And that, in fact, if you do voluntarily, like Seattle did, or Louisville, Kentucky, continue sort of your efforts to get racial proportionality, and that this, as it did in Seattle, interferes with the voluntary choices of both black and white students, that in fact that is a violation of the 14th Amendment under the Seattle School District case. So what is a violation of the law is de jure segregation, segregation by law. If it occurs through parental choice, like Senator Amber has described, Reich got young.
Oh, Amber's great.
Okay, as Amber. That is not a violation of the Constitution. And any sort of legal efforts that Minnesota might take to interfere with parental choice would be constitutionally suspect. And so these efforts can be done as a voluntary method, but I think that if you try to impose racial quotas on charter schools in Minnesota, you would be actually violating the federal Constitution. And, you know, there'd be hell to pay. So I think that the people who are pushing these ideas need to be very careful and consult the best possible legal representation.
And who might that be?
In Minnesota, I don't know.
Do you want to weigh in on that, Representative Loon, or shall we move on?
Well, you know, I take it back to the discussion that we often have and the things that I weigh what we're considering at the legislature as to what is the primary function of education. And there are a lot of important goals, you know, an integrated society and eliminating segregation is important. But the ultimate goal of education and our funding education is to make sure that each child in Minnesota is educated to the best of their ability. So within that system of priorities, there is an overwhelming top priority there, and that is the individual needs of the children. And preserving that and preserving the element of parental choice, I think stands head and shoulders with that dominant need and purpose for having education. So, you know, I think if we can keep that perspective in mind as well, it helps us sort out some of these other competing interests.
So, and I think that's a nice segue to the question of economic justice, which we've heard so much about here and elsewhere in recent weeks, and which is going to be a feature of the upcoming session. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how we use education as a driver of economic justice and what public perceptions we might need to change about that here.
Yeah, and I'm pleased to be on the task force that's co-chaired by my colleague, Representative Knobloch. I'm very pleased that he put sort of an issue of educational choice on the table at our last meeting as an essential element to how we're going to help people who have suffered economic disparity within our state make greater gains. And there is no question about it that in our society and our economy, if you are not educated, if you do not have the education necessary to attain a job in our economy today, you will not earn as much as others. You will likely live in poverty and suffer from a whole list of maladies that befall people who are in poverty. So it starts with education. And we know from the statistics brought to us by the state demographer that many people of color, particularly black Minnesotans, have lower educational attainment than others. You can look at the current educational attainment of children of color, in particular black children in our schools. In a lot of our inner city schools, in Minneapolis and St. Paul specifically, the education or the graduation rate is far below that of their peers. That dooms those children to a life of poverty unless they can do something or they are offered the opportunity to turn that around and either get their GED and move on to other career training, college, whatever their pathway may be, so they can actually earn a living and be successful in our economy.
I have been, first of all, I want to commend the task force. I also want to commend Governor Dayton for his focus on this, and I'm really hopeful that something will happen in this legislative session on the racial disparities and economic disparities. I'd like to make a suggestion in where we can focus some of that effort. There is a high need and desire for more attention to preschool education. There's two schools of thought on that. And what I'd like to do is suggest an opportunity in the middle. Many support the scholarships, and I do. I like that. Some support universal pre-K, a good goal, but very expensive. So what I would like to suggest is chartering for preschool, okay? Which is where the certain amount of money is set aside for free preschool for those parents and teachers and school districts that want to come forward and create basically a charter school preschool. Because interestingly enough, our laws are very difficult for charter schools to fund preschool. So if you had just a bucket of money that those parents and teachers wanted to apply for to create a public free, tuition-free preschool, you'd also have the scholarships, and then you'd have a limited number here of those that are engaged. You could get the parents who are engaged who want this, and that could occur, and it would be less expensive than universal preschool. So that's one way to possibly address some of these economic disparities without having to spend as much money in the other context.
So possibly the most controversial story that I have written in the last year pointed out that the legislation in Minnesota last year pushed by the governor for universal pre-K would not necessarily extend to charters.
True.
Yes, true, and yet the pushback that I got was absolutely incredible. I wonder if perhaps you could address how this is funded in other states. It's a commonality in other states, correct, that we provide scholarships for students looking for pre-K opportunities?
Actually, it's very interesting you should mention pre-K because the state of New Jersey is probably the most resistant state to school choice that you can imagine because of the power of the teachers' unions there. But they have been doing it, they have an educational equity lawsuit there called the Abbott case, which lawyers know that sometimes cases have more than one Supreme Court decision. So you might have Abbott 1 or 2. So I checked the other day to see how many Abbott decisions there were from the New Jersey Supreme Court. They are up to Abbott 22. That's XXII. I think at some point they're going to exceed the number of Super Bowls in this one case. Now, the most bizarre part about that is that around Abbott 7, the New Jersey Supreme Court decided that all that they were doing was rearranging chairs on the Titanic by doing all of their changes to the state funding mechanism. And they created a judicial voucher system, a judicial scholarship for pre-K. Because the thought was that the minority students who, these districts, the Abbott districts, were predominantly minority, overwhelmingly minority, and pre-K was what was going to solve it. Unfortunately, that alone has not been enough in New Jersey, which is why they're up to Abbott 22. But yes, I have always advocated that in school choice programs, that we need to provide the earliest possible opportunities because school choice programs just don't really work for high school students who are minority because by the time they are opting into a scholarship program at high school as 9th graders, they are already 4 years behind where they should be. And schools, private schools, charter schools, don't want students who are going to need so much remediation. So you need to start as young as possible and provide those parents as many choices as possible. So the New Jersey Supreme Court allows private preschools as well as public preschools and funds the mechanism by providing the money to the child. The districts have to provide it to the child and then the parents choose. And I think that that's the driver that we need to close this racial gap because it is, in fact, parents of color, families of color who have no choice. We all don't realize that when we choose where to live, based largely on how good the schools are, we are exercising a form of parental choice. But if you are low income, you lack that power. And school choice programs empower parents to act as if they've got more money and to choose schools. And the schools react to parents differently because the parents have the wherewithal to come to their school or to go elsewhere. So if they don't do a good job for minority students, then the parents are going to move the kids. And it's the most direct form of accountability that we have. It's the accountability that we exercise every day. I mean, if the public schools don't do well by our kids, we can afford to move them to private schools. And school choice empowers low-income families to act the same way. And most importantly, though, it changes the dynamic about how they are regarded by the public schools, because they can no longer be taken for granted, because they can leave. And the public schools treat our kids differently than low-income kids because they know we could leave. But if low-income families could leave too, they have to be valued customers. They have to be paid attention to in a different way than they currently are. Today you can take them for granted. And you can collect all sorts of extra federal dollars and extra state dollars because you have a lot of low-income kids. But you don't actually have to serve them particularly well. And what we want is for them to be served well.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up to that, and then in about 2 minutes we're going to start taking questions. And I will, for better or for worse, repeat them for the sake of the recording and the webcast. So be thinking of your questions. Representative Loon, our guest from the East Coast, at the start of his remarks, said that he was disappointed that Minnesota hadn't taken choice further. So you have been the sponsor of the tax credit scholarship legislation here. And just to ask you kind of a paradoxical question, if we have so much choice in Minnesota, why do we need that form? Why do we need one more form?
Well, I think to give parents a maximum amount of choices. We do give them choices in terms of you could do open enrollment among public schools, you've got charter schools, but when it comes to parents who may decide that a private school option is the best thing for their child, but they do not have the money to afford that, they really don't have another option to go to. And tax credits help level that playing field for poor parents. And I think it's important that we provide that range of choices. It is something that's available to middle and upper middle class families, and to really offer and be a state that stands behind school choice. That is really the next avenue to fully engage all parents in the full range of choices that may be open to them, open to their children, things that they want to choose. And if I could just hearken a little bit on the preschool scholarships, and the preschool topic is something we engaged in extensively in the past legislative session, and probably will again. I think interesting proposal, Amber, and I will take a look at that. But George really triggered a thought for me, which is that in order to provide the most choice to parents, the scholarship road that we've gone down really does that. And particularly, we've got two strains of funds and money that go with the scholarship. And Pathway 1 is awarded to the parents, and where they can choose. They can absolutely choose from any range of quality early childhood education providers. And if they choose one and they're not happy with it, they can take their scholarship money and go to another provider. And that's something that I think is incredibly important in this discussion. If you're going to have successful children, you've got to have parents who are successfully engaged in their education, fostering that education with them every step of the way. And you do that by empowering parents, not by limiting their choices, not by saying, you know, we'll give you a scholarship or we'll provide preschool, but only if you send your child to this particular type of provider. So I think that's incredibly important principle to maintain as we're embarked on trying to help more children from economically disadvantaged families get that early start that they need to be successful once they get to K-12 school.
One easy fix to that might help to open this up a little bit, if I may, Beth, real quickly, is this. You may not realize that, let's say a charter school decides they want a preschool, and so they go ahead and they figure out a way to have a private preschool with the scholarship money, and then the rest pay. Just know that in Minnesota, if anybody is actually paying for a student in that preschool, the child in the preschool does not have priority to go to the charter school to which it's attached. They have to go through the lottery, so there is no automatic enrollment, if you will. However, if it's a free preschool, and so the question is, how is it free? Okay, they get automatic enrollment in the charter school. Now, there's something wrong with that. So that's an easy fix. If you're going to have a private preschool and the scholarships, then allow those charter students to be able to enroll into the charter that follows. So legislators here, I'm happy to be a resource on that.
Well, and the Minnesota Department of Education last week released the first review of the scholarships, and they got very high marks. And I think it's going to be interesting in the upcoming legislative session to watch how a program that has gotten such favorable and broad and bipartisan reviews stacks up against a very determined governor with a very different vision. And so I send you courage, all of you. And perhaps now there are questions?
I have a question on your last point about the teachers being engaged with the student and as far as the success of the student. And the state of Minnesota has the largest achievement gap in the country, I believe. And your premise is that these children that are not achieving come from homes where there's two parents that are available to engage with the child. And that's not, I mean, that's mythology. These children, that's the reason why they are falling behind is because they don't have the family background with the parents or the economic viability to provide the education at home. So I was just, I mean, I'm just kind of uncomfortable with that mythology that's being presented still to this very day about children who come from disadvantaged economic backgrounds. It's almost like, are you sure you're not just shifting the blame for the failure of the educational system onto the student? Because ultimately, if the student doesn't have parents to engage with them in education, then ultimately, isn't it the student's fault that you're saying?
So let me try to re-encapsulate this. I think that the question goes to whether it is fair to expect a school and put the burden on the school to overcome a deficit that a child may show up with or a challenge that a child may show up with. In this case, the gentleman is talking about an intact family.
Actually, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, to elaborate, that
okay, so can we cut this down to a question? I'm going to cut you off. I'm going to ask you to tee this up to a question.
Okay.
Can you form a question?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Would you like me to ask a question?
Oh, come on.
Okay, let's just move. Let's move on. Would somebody like to read?
The
Sir.
educational system refuses to innovate.
Sir.
To address the customer.
Sir.
Okay, let me
Go
try
for
to
it.
take a crack at
Have at it.
I think at what the concern you're expressing. And I talked about the importance of parents being engaged in their children's education, and that is an important component of whether or not a child is successful. And yes, there are a lot of children in our society that don't have two-parent stable families. That's true, and that presents a lot of challenges to the child, to the educational system. However, I don't believe that we can allow poverty or lack of economic status to be a reason to say a child cannot learn. I absolutely reject that, and I think that has gotten, we have allowed our educational system, frankly, off the hook by saying, until you solve poverty, we can't reach these children, and I absolutely reject that. Because we do ask our schools to take children of various abilities with maybe physical or mental or other disabilities and teach them to the best of their ability. And it should be no less for children from regardless of their economic backgrounds. And you can go everywhere across our country. There's amazing stories of children who do well, who come from really incredible hardships and family situations. And they rise above that because they have teachers, they have an education system that believes in them, that sets the bar high, and demands that the child can meet those expectations and believes that they can. And I think we have gotten away from that in a lot of our schools. There's a lot of excuses why we can't teach these children, why these children can't learn. And I think we have been far too willing to accept those excuses as a reason for not overcoming those obstacles.
Could I just add one piece to that answer? The vast majority of the school choice programs we're involved in, we're defending the programs against, in many cases, the teachers' unions or the ACLU or Americans United for Separation of Church and State. These programs, which are not in Minnesota, are targeted towards low-income families. And the parents that we represent almost invariably, once we had a two-parent family, but we've had like 25 of these cases, and almost all of our clients are single moms. And what they like about school choice and why one of the reasons they choose private schools for their kids are because the private schools are able to do things the public schools can't. I mean, they teach a value system. They have a very disciplined environment. Oftentimes the kids wear uniforms. They incorporate the best elements of charter schools, but they are free to be what they are, which in many cases is religious schools, and to provide the families with a structure that it is very difficult for the public schools today to do because of constitutional limitations on religion. But even the private schools that are not religious are able to maintain discipline, and the families respond to that. And the single moms, who are most of our clients, react to that and appreciate the structure of the schools and view the schools as helping them raise their kids. And we've seen from research that the parents change as a result of school choice. They do, in fact, become more engaged in their kids' education, even when they're single moms, because it's a much closer partnership between the parent and the school, and there are requirements on the parents to participate typically in the school's activities. They may not be able to pay very much, but they do have to volunteer some time. And it's a very different environment. I guess I went too long.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, I guess, as Minnesotans, we've done fully better at it, but just curious, we're looking at Minneapolis, where we've got $21,000 being spent per student. When it comes to 10th grade reading results, you're basically 15% of black students are reading at grade level in 10th grade, 15% for Hispanic students, and now we've got a disaster with the superintendent search over in St. Paul. We've got a teacher, actually multiple teachers being beat up by students, one receiving brain damage. We have students in unsafe environments. That district spends about $18,000 per student. Looking at a sign that says National School Choice Week. Thoughts on actually just saying, let's go full bore school choice and give those parents that are stuck in unsafe failing districts actual education savings accounts or vouchers or something along those lines. Polling shows Minnesotans are actually overwhelmingly in support of those policies. Just curious if anybody has any thoughts on those. And the situation, of course, in our urban core.
Yes, I think polls will show that people are supportive of it, and I think there is a great deal of support out there, but I don't know that that support would necessarily exist with the current legislature and with the governor. And so, going full-scale vouchers or choice is something that has been proposed in the past, I'm sure will continue to be, and something that I would continue to strive for in terms of trying to provide maximum choice. But in the meantime, I think we've also got to look at the current policies that we have, and if there are things that we can do to try to make better use of those funds. And we do provide, a pretty significant amount of funding for students through our compensatory revenue, which is basically a term of revenue for each child that qualifies for free and reduced lunch in your schools. Let me give you one specific example. We've had stories both referencing Minneapolis and St. Paul over the past probably year or so in the major papers, talking about schools with challenging student populations in either of those districts, and how the schools that perhaps need it most, with the most children of challenge to educate, have the least experienced teachers. And why aren't we providing some kind of an incentive or the ability of schools to say, I need my best teachers, I need my most experienced teachers in this school to help these children achieve? And that's very difficult right now. Just let me say out front, my children were educated in public school, teachers are wonderful, and I don't have a beef with teachers being in a union. I think that's fine. But you can't allow the policies of union membership to basically take the important principles of educating those children and have that become a lesser consideration. We need good teachers to teach where they are needed most. We're the ones that have those skills and that experience. But that doesn't happen now. And so we need to make some changes to say, let's give schools, parents, and the tools to make sure that we're giving kids what they need in our schools.
I served in the legislature in the 80s and 90s, and vouchers were a topic at that time. They didn't pass then. They haven't passed under either Republican or Democratic leadership. It's just not something that is probably going to happen anytime soon in Minnesota. So what can we do instead? And that is going to what you're saying, and that is investing in teacher empowerment. That's something that everyone can agree on. I have been a long-time proponent now of teacher-led schools, and that can occur in districts and it can occur in charters. Giving autonomy and leadership to teachers. This is what Al Shanker saw in chartering. He thought it should be within the system rather than outside of the system, but he did see this. You will see now across the country about 70 to 80 teacher-led schools. I'm working with charter schools in this state that are doing that. If you give that empowerment to teachers, they can do so much more. So that's one point. The second point I'll just simply make is this. I don't know how we actually can govern with the school board structure that we have. It's broken. You look at governance of a nonprofit and you wonder, how can anyone serve as superintendent with like 9 bosses fueling, different constituencies? It's an impossible task, and until we figure out how we do that better, I'm really concerned about the future of just general school board politics affecting the future of Minneapolis and St. Paul.
So Humphrey Institute, would you get your fellows on that? Working on it.
Right.
I think, unfortunately, I see a whole bunch of hands up, but I believe we've come to the end of our time. So I don't know if there's an opportunity for our speakers to spend some time with the audience. We've had a handful of patient hands up.
Well, Beth, thank you so much. Let me invite you to thank this marvelous panel. Like many things, this end has come way too early. So I invite you to a reception up in the panel. Representative Loon, former Senator Reichgott-Young, my colleague Dick Comer are all sticking around. Please join us there, and please continue the discussion. Beth, thank you for your probing questions today, and I thank the Humphrey Institute for hosting us. Have a good day.